What this non-duality thing does is explain that there's no further enlightenment to be had. The fact that you're thinking about enlightenment in the first place means that you've transcended the simple ego. You're stuck with this now. The sooner you deal with it, get over it, and understand it, the better. Because that means that then you're like, you've that final, yeah, in a way, that is like the final step of enlightenment. Enlightenment's not whatever the definition, and then assuming that it's the definition that I said before, which is ego, which is honest with itself. But even if it's an ego that's not honest with itself, it doesn't matter. There's an ego that's not honest with itself, but is just living its life, but hasn't got any idea of enlightenment. And what that would also mean is it hasn't got any idea of trying to achieve a psychological state which is different from its current psychological state. It hasn't got a desire to do that. It's just living its naturalness as itself. Like an animal doesn't have any desire to have a deeper psychological state. An enlightenment idea hasn't got that idea. It's just happy in its own state. It wouldn't even think of not being in the state that it's actually in. So if humans are in that state, and many are, they're not necessarily honest with themselves or anything. They're just living the normal life that an ego would live, a human ego that lives, and it would kind of have pain and happiness, and it's not really understanding its own self. Like a child doesn't really understand itself, but it lives very naturally and doesn't ever think like, oh, I wish I could have a different version or a different higher level of my current awareness. It just lives its life naturally as a child. And that's fine. For any adult that's doing that, the whole idea of enlightenment isn't even a subject. If it is a subject for you, that means that something went wrong. If you feel like you need to achieve some kind of enlightenment, that means that you got broken somehow. Your normal, natural way of living has been broken, and you've got this idea now that something's wrong, and you need to achieve some kind of enlightenment to become more natural. But it's not actually possible because the way to become more natural is not to want to become more natural. So all you have to do is understand what's happened, and then you will then be balanced back out in the way that you've understood that your desire to have an enlightenment state is just some kind of uh, ego went wrong, or ego got overdeveloped. There's no going back from it. That is the enlightenment. But there's a period where you don't realize that that's the enlightenment. You think that that's the brokenness. What this non-duality thing does is explain that there's no further enlightenment to be had. The fact that you're thinking about enlightenment in the first place means that you've transcended the simple ego. You're stuck with this now. The sooner you deal with it, get over it, and understand it, the better. Because that means that then you're like, you've that final, yeah, in a way, that is like the final step of enlightenment. There's two halves to it. There's the one thing where you went past the animal or child consciousness into a place where you're enlightened. You've got an additional piece of, well, in one way you're broken, and in the other way it's an enhanced consciousness. But because it's self-reflective, it kind of feels like something's wrong, but it's not. It's just not the basic consciousness anymore. And as soon as you realize that nothing's going to change, actually, you can't go to another even more enlightened version of it. This broken consciousness is it. And as soon as you understand what it is, you realize that it is a superior consciousness. It doesn't mean you're sitting there feeling like really happy all the time. On the contrary, you could say it's the end of happiness. You can't experience the same kind of happiness that you can experience when you're in basic consciousness, animal or child consciousness. They can be much more ecstatic and much more in despair. But this enlightened consciousness, this beyond basic consciousness, doesn't have that kind of stuff. It's not as warped into. It's not as wrapped up. It's detached. You do fall into it, and if you do find yourself in a state of despair or happiness, it's actually a good thing. It would be kind of an extra experience. In a way, you'd welcome it.